Great. So as John said, my name is Erica Staff. I am Clean Water Advocate for Penn Environment. And Penn Environment is a statewide, citizen-based environmental advocacy organization. We have roughly 130,000 members statewide, and we worked on a variety of issues. I happen to work on clean water, and specifically for the last 4 years, hydraulic fracturing and gas drilling, but we also work on issues to protect Pennsylvania's air, water, and preservation of open space. And we do work at the state as well as the local and the national level to make this happen. So for those who need a little primer or want some background, I wanted to just first demonstrate where shale gas drilling is happening across the Northeast. I know Melanie is going to get into a little bit more about where it's happening across the U.S. But as you can see here in the pink, that is where the Marcellus shale is, and the yellow is the Utica shale. So we have a significant amount of shale to be drilled to get natural gas, to get gas in the Northeast. And unlike traditional gas drilling, which we've seen for more than 100 years all over the country, and oil drilling, shale gas drilling is quite different. What is shale? Shale is actually a geologic formation. The Marcellus shale lies about 5,000, 8,000 feet below the surface, and it's the gas is actually contained in the small pores and the cracks of the shale. So unlike kind of free-flowing a reservoir of gas that was easier to be able to drill for and acquire with shallow gas drilling, this actually requires a significantly different process. Just a little bit more about the shale that we have here in the Northeast in Pennsylvania, because I'm specifically going to be talking about what we've experienced in Pennsylvania. And the majority of drilling in Pennsylvania has been in the Marcellus shale, even though the Utica shale also exists there. But in total, the Marcellus shale is 54,000 square miles, which is about equal to the size of Florida. And it runs through Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and a sliver of Virginia. And then the Utica shale, as you can see, covers more area, but there have been, like I said, fewer wells drilled in Pennsylvania so far. And I know that Melanie is going to get into a little bit more of the actual process of shale gas drilling, so I'll allude to that in my presentation, but you can get more of a primer on that in hers. As you can see here in Pennsylvania, it covers about 64% of the state. As of August, so I haven't updated this for September, there have been more than 11,000 drilling permits that have been issued for shale gas drilling in Pennsylvania, mostly for the Marcellus shale. And according to our Department of Environmental Protection's records, more than 5,800 wells have been drilled. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of them have been hydraulically fractured, but 5,800 wells drilled. So that's according to the DEP. According to some other sources, it's a bit higher when you actually, when you look at all the records together. And I wanted to touch on the environmental problems that not only have arisen, kind of that the media or that others have been concerned about, but actually that we've experienced in Pennsylvania, that people have seen firsthand. I'm going to discuss chemical and wastewater leaks and the accidents that folks have seen, threatening drinking water. How does it affect drinking water? Public and private lands. I'll mostly discuss public lands, but you can imagine how it would affect private lands as well. Air pollution, and then just sheer water use, water quantity. So as you can see, it covers a variety of issues, all of which Penn Environment works on, and a lot of you probably work on as well. So chemical and wastewater leaks. As part of the hydraulic fracturing process, drilling companies combine a cocktail of chemicals with sand, silica sand, or other kind of called proppants, but it's often referred to as just as sand, and millions of gallons of water, forcing the fluid underground at high pressures in order to break up the shale and allow the natural gas to flow to the surface. In total, Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection has actually disclosed 85 chemicals that could possibly be used for hydraulic fracturing and also for the drilling process, for the drilling muds and other chemicals that could be used in a variety of processes associated with this type of extraction. Some of them are pretty benign, But some of them, we've noticed, and that's where the concern takes hold, are not so benign. They're pretty harmful and toxic. Benzene, toluene, xylene, petroleum distillates are among the chemicals on that list. And many of them are suspected or known carcinogens. So although we know the list, we have the list of 85 chemicals that could possibly be used for hydraulic fracturing in Pennsylvania. The thing that we don't have as much information about is at every single well, what are the actual chemicals that are being used, and in what volumes and in what concentrations. So that's going to be a big theme, I think, of what we're talking about today. Chemicals, why are these chemicals used? They're used in for a lot of phases of extracting the gas from the shale, from drilling the well to keeping it clean, to keeping things from growing inside of the well bore, and for hydraulic fracturing, for friction reducers, almost anything you can imagine you need it for. So that's what we've seen it used for. And it's not just the chemicals that are being used, but the wastewater that comes out, either as flowback water or produced water throughout the life of the well, that comes back up to the surface, is millions of gallons of water mixed with these chemicals, and also contains the traces of naturally occurring chemicals from underneath the ground. Some of these are chlorides, some of these are just total dissolved solids from under the ground that would be kind of okay if they just stayed under the ground. But there have been kind of generally speaking, wastewater samples that have been found to have high levels of radioactive material, radium, of arsenic. So as you can imagine, if you have this water, this fluid, then that needs to be treated, and it's millions of gallons, that's a big challenge, and that's a big health and environment risk. So that's where, as you can see from the photo here, sometimes in Pennsylvania, and actually oftentimes in Pennsylvania, not only the fresh water that's used for hydraulic fracturing, but the wastewater that comes out of the well is allowed to be stored in open-air pits, which already has had major effects on wildlife, on livestock, where 28 cows somehow broke through the fence and got exposed to some wastewater, and then had to be quarantined from the other livestock that were then going to be sold to the public. So that creates a public health threat as well. And in some cases, you can imagine that in this case in particular, this happens to be a woman named June Chappell's house from a couple of years ago. The wastewater impoundment, as they call them, was sited not on her property, but very, very close to her house. I'll point out her house. That's her house. This is the wastewater impoundment with all those chemicals that we were talking about. The stench was just incredible. She couldn't open her windows in the summertime. Her dogs had to be brought in there. And I'll show you a photo later. At one point, the pit actually caught on fire, so you can imagine the air emissions that led to. So as these chemicals, as this wastewater comes back up to the surface, it needs to be treated somehow. And I'll get into a little bit more of that in a second, but what I want to focus on is just the risk to, again, environment and public health as this wastewater is sitting there, as it's being transported, whether by truck, in some cases by boat, up the Monongahela River to Ohio, by pipeline. And we've seen just dozens and dozens, hundreds, in fact, cases of leaks and spills all throughout Pennsylvania, some of which then leak into, and I can show you this case, leak into waterways and affect wildlife there. In other cases, affect the land, spill into the soil, and then affect the land. Some of them are small, some of them are large. This was actually not a wastewater spill. This was hydraulic fracturing fluid spill, so the concentrated hydraulic fracturing fluids that were going to be used for a well spilled in Dimick in northeastern Pennsylvania in 2009. And at that point, fracking was so new in Pennsylvania that emergency responders didn't know how to find what the makeup of these chemicals were, and therefore didn't know exactly how to treat this river, how to treat this creek when the spill occurred. Drinking water. So related to what I just discussed, obviously leaks and spills are a part of the threat to drinking water. You can imagine if There's a surface water, and that's where a majority of people get their drinking water. A leak or a spill that's large enough can certainly affect that. The majority of wastewater that's recovered in Pennsylvania still actually does go to treatment plants. And in the past, they were going to municipal treatment plants for the most part. That posed a threat to drinking water for more than 325,000 people outside of Pittsburgh when drillers were sending their wastewater to municipal treatment plants along with everything, the traditional types of treatment, the water that is treated at those plants. Although those treatment plants actually weren't able to adequately treat the chemicals found in the wastewater, specifically, in part because they didn't know exactly what they were meant to treat, what they needed to be treating. So that was a major threat to the quality of water for thousands of residents right outside of Pittsburgh, and especially during drought season, that was a huge concern. For 2 years in a row, there was a drinking water advisory placed for those residents and those people who actually got their water from that river. And to this day, there are some lingering effects that I can discuss later. Here is a photo of the Beaver Run Reservoir, which is just northeast of Pittsburgh. And you can see to the right is the actual reservoir that has leased its gas rights to allow drilling there. And all of the dozens of gas wells that sit right near there. I'll show you a photo in a second that actually demonstrates how close some of these sites are and that they're uphill from the waterway. That's a drinking water source for 125,000 people. So again, huge amount of people who could be exposed to chemicals should there be a major blowout or explosion, which we've seen in other parts of Pennsylvania. Private water wells have also been affected. We know that 26 families in Dimock, Pennsylvania, this might be a town that all of a sudden that you've heard of and shot to fame through national media accounts of the problems that they've experienced. But we know in places like Dimock where 26 families experienced water pollution, they actually get their water from groundwater sources. They have private water wells. And in many cases, in too many cases in Pennsylvania, the well itself, the cement casing cracks, it is compromised under the great amount of pressure that's used for hydraulic fracturing. And what we've seen is, in a lot of cases, soon after drilling or fracking begins, people start to experience discoloration in their water, horrible tasting and smelling water, health effects, and in some cases, in this Dimock case in particular, it was actually found to be caused by hydraulic fracturing or by drilling or by the seismic activity in the area, either way caused in part by that drilling activity in the area. In a lot of cases, however, we know that there are a lot of cases, like I mentioned, where drilling happens and then people experience effects, but it is incredibly difficult without baseline information for people to prove in the court of law that it actually, prove causation. So the body of evidence is growing, and we just need to, make sure that the people who are experiencing these effects are able to be protected under the regulations and enforcement that on the ground in these states like Pennsylvania. In the Beaver Run Reservoir, you can see here just how close it is to the drinking water for 125,000 people. So, open space. I'm mostly going to talk about public lands. Unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, more than 40% of the state parks that sit on top of the Marcellus Shale are already open for drilling. That obviously has effects not only for just the quality of our forests, recreation, tourism dollars that are coming in or could come in, and wildlife habitats that have been fragmented. Only a percentage of them have been drilled so far, but again, 40% are open, and as we see more and more land that is needed for drilling. We expect to see more drilling and more land taken up in our state forests. Now our state parks could be next, our beloved state parks. If anyone's ever traveled to Southwest PA and been to Ohio Pile State Park, it's one of the more famous ones. You can go tubing there, you can visit, you can go hiking there, you can go biking. Exploratory drilling is happening in that park, unfortunately. And the problem here isn't just that there's a well pad and then it's reclaimed and there's forest again. It's that drilling takes up an estimated 9 acres when you consider all of the access roads, the impoundments. I can show you a picture here of just how large some of the impoundment ponds are. This is a huge amount of space, so it really does have the capacity, not one well, but the cumulative effect of all the wells that are being drilled in Pennsylvania and expected to be drilled in Pennsylvania are having on our forests. Okay, and I just wanted to point out that that arrow is pointing to a big rig truck, so you get a sense of exactly the size of these things. A little bit more on the state forest, I'll keep moving along, but just to give you a sense. And then one of the last sections I wanted to cover was air quality. We know that at various phases of extraction, invisible but harmful emissions can leak and have leaked into the atmosphere. That's everything from volatile organic compounds, which is a precursor to smog, and that comes from everything from the wells itself to the storage tanks to the compressor stations that are needed. So again, linking to open space protection, it's not just that wells are drilled and then they're reclaimed. There's permanent infrastructure that's left behind, which has major impacts for not just open space, but for communities where it's allowed in residential communities. Second air concern is air toxics like benzene. People living right next to that have to deal with the air toxics. And methane, which is 21 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So not entering into the air in the same quantities as CO2, but much more potent, and is creating, is contributing to global warming in that way. And the last category I wanted to go over that we've seen in Pennsylvania is just the sheer water use. This photo is from several different companies that left behind their water withdrawal pipes from Chartiers Creek in southwestern Pennsylvania. You can see that if there's not a solid water management plan, that the cumulative effect can be disastrous for a river or waterway. And especially in western Pennsylvania, the Ohio River Basin is less well managed than in the center or the eastern part of the state. Considering that each well requires 2 to 6 million gallons of water, you can do the math and figure out, with tens of thousands more wells expected in Pennsylvania, just how much of a depletive use that is, where we know it's, the water is then going underground, some of it's staying there permanently, some of it's then being treated and sent who knows where, because we don't have a great tracking system of where the water ends up in the end. And in Pennsylvania, we have seen a couple of cases of wells, of rivers and waterways going dry because there just wasn't a plan in place to address the water withdrawals. Lastly, we've seen the track record. This is June Tappel's house. This is the pit that caught on fire because of flaring that happened near her house to let off the excess methane. And it's not just that we're nervous about these problems. We've seen them happen, and in fact, we've looked at DEP's website and found more than 4,000 violations of cornerstone environmental laws in Pennsylvania, and those are just the ones that have been found. So major reasons for concern. I want to leave enough time for Melanie to be able to go through Ohio, since I know we're in Ohio, and for your questions. So I'm going to leave it there. If you would like, I'll just put a little plug in. If you'd like more information about some of the people and the stories, I have a DVD that Penn Environment produced a couple of years ago, and I'd be happy to give them out. We have many copies here, so just come see me afterwards, along with a report that goes through the impacts of drilling in Pennsylvania and why it's dangerous for residential neighborhoods. So thanks very much, and I'll be happy to take questions a little bit later.
Yeah, this happens every time. There's some images in there that cause that message to come up. Excuse me, I'll have to probably take a couple water breaks as we go along here, which is normal for me as I'm giving talks. My name's Melanie Houston. My title, I guess, is Director of Water Policy and Environmental Health at the Ohio Environmental Council. Been there just going on a year and been getting fully immersed in this issue, given talks, a number of talks on the topic, and seems as though, you know, the presentation keeps kind of changing and, you know, depending on the setting. Today we've got less time. Forgive me, I will leave out probably a number of details that if there are questions I can go, you know, more into depth on the specifics, but today is going to be kind of a breeze through given the time that we have. So is there anyone in the room that would consider, well, I was just going to kind of see what, if you consider yourself to have a beginner level of knowledge on this, maybe by show of hands, maybe a medium level of knowledge, medium level, and then most medium level, and then anybody expert level of knowledge that, okay, good. So for questions we don't know, Kathy Henratty up here, then we might have help with that as well. So yes, I'm going to talk with you about Ohio Environmental Council's concerns with horizontal hydraulic fracturing, or also use the term fracking for short, and then really get into and spend most time on the specific threats to Ohio. Just a tad bit about the Ohio Environmental Council. We are probably a sister, you know, organization to Penn Environment, yes, Penn Environment, and again, also a statewide environmental policy organization. We have about 3,000 individual members, 100 group members, and our work includes, you know, legislative work, legal work with a law center. Most of us are policy staffers, and then we've got a, you know, development and administrative team. And I did want to provide just a bit of background on the state of shale gas development in Ohio, some of the general environmental risks associated with fracking, and then I'll move into the specific risks to Ohio. Many of you have probably seen this map showing the shale deposits throughout the U.S., but just bringing attention here with the bold red circle to the fact that, you know, large portions of these shale plays or deposits are in the Great Lakes regions. This is a map from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, which is a little different from Pennsylvania, where they have their Department of Environmental Protection, which houses sort of what we have housed in two different agencies, Ohio Department of Natural Resources and our Ohio EPA. So for us, our Ohio DNR is our regulatory agency overseeing oil and gas permitting in Ohio. So this is a map, and then some aspects the Ohio EPA deals with. I won't get into it much today, but there's an air permit and a wetlands permit that they've issued around horizontal fracking. But this is a map that ODNR put out, and I thought it was interesting. It is different from the map that Erica showed before. And that has been, I think, a source of controversy even within the agency. I believe that this map is sort of indicative of what they see as the area of the shale deposits that will be productive or tapped into, because this one does not go as far west into the state as Erica's map was showing. But the Utica there is on the left, the darker brown, the Marcellus on the right, and we have in Ohio, and you can go and get updates at that ODNR website, 383 wells that have been permitted, and those are mostly Utica shale wells, and so that's 367 Utica, 16 Marcellus. Of those, just 140 have been drilled so far. And this is really the only place I'm going to get into a little bit of the process. Just want to say, you know, as with any industrial activity, the development of oil and gas involves risks to air, land, water, wildlife, and communities, and also, of course, public health. And so probably some of you, large number of you in this room have seen this image. I apologize, the text is too small to read, but it's basically depicting this new combination of horizontal drilling with the hydraulic fracturing technique, which is the use of sand, water, and chemicals injected at high pressures to blast open the shale rock and release the trapped gas. that's about as in detail as I'm going to get for today. But one important point is that what you will hear industry argue and even our Ohio DNR say is that this technology has been around for 40 years. You know, a case for we've done this before, we've seen this before, this is safe. But that's not quite accurate. While the use of hydraulic fracturing to drill vertical wells has been around, you know, somewhere around that long, using the technique of the hydraulic fracturing combined with the horizontal drilling is very new and actually only began with our first permit in Ohio in 2011. And so really it's about the scale. The scale is much larger with much more water being used, many more chemicals, and because it needs to travel a further distance out horizontally. So thus leading to many more potential risks and we feel a much greater potential environmental impact. So where are Ohioans on this issue? I'd like to include this slide. It was from a little research summarized from a Quinnipiac poll conducted in January 2012 and really demonstrates you know, a little bit about our public base and how that informs our kind of political landscape as well. So 2-to-1, Ohioans say that the economic benefits of drilling outweigh the environmental concerns. Yet, at the same time, 3-to-1 say we should stop fracking until further studies are conducted. So that's a bit of a confusing message. Oops. So I want to speak briefly to our general environmental concerns associated with fracking, and Erica got into this quite, you know, did a nice overview. First, we have the potential for water contamination, and this could occur as a result of surface level spills and accidents, well casing failures, and through the migration of chemicals or methane. And just highlighting a few highlights from the literature as well as one news report. We have a recent Cornell University study which connecting the death of cattle to exposure to fracking fluids. We have a Duke University study which found methane concentrations 17 times higher in drinking water wells within 1 kilometer of fracking and shale gas extraction than to those drinking water wells outside that 1 kilometer range. And then finally, Akron Beacon Journal, reputable news organization, Ohio, conducted an investigation which found 1 million pounds of chemicals used at a single well site, which kind of helps counter the argument of, well, it's such a small percentage of chemicals that are used for the water compared to the water used in the process. Well, that's a pretty significant amount to be, you know, stored on site and then put into the ground. So these findings demonstrate reason for concern, both for drinking water and for surface level water. And in terms of air quality, the pollution associated with fracking is, you know, often, the air pollution is often overlooked or minimized compared to water concerns. Yet, I often say it's not a matter of if these air emissions will occur, as they most certainly will, but when. Averages from Pennsylvania and West Virginia that my colleague had put together in his research show that it's not uncommon for all stages of production to burn upwards of 29,000 gallons of diesel fuel in approximately 5 days. And, you know, Erica talked about the different components, the different types of emissions, benzene, formaldehyde, 40 other toxins alone in the diesel exhaust. And these are just a few quotes from, I believe it was a health impact assessment that was conducted out of the Colorado School of Public Health and some research that became, I think the results became so controversial that I don't know that it affected the research agenda, but the degree to which the results were publicized and put out there was affected. And finally, in terms of land and wildlife impacts, you know, fracking is likely to increase habitat fragmentation with well pads 4 to 5 acres in size. And Erica noted that the footprint goes beyond that when you look at roads and storage ponds, an increase in noise and light pollution, and an increase in stream sedimentation. I attended a one-day conference at Ohio State University where I won't remember the name of the gentleman, but I thought he did a really nice job. His whole presentation was, maybe somewhere around 15, 20 minutes, focusing just on the impacts from increased truck traffic to the roads, the degradation of the roads, and then the resulting erosion that would occur, especially for roads that were nearby streams and tributaries, and the resulting sedimentation and effect to wildlife. And so now I'd like to speak to some of the risks specific to Ohio. I hit on these, each of these one at a time. I won't read them all to you. We'll go through them each. Water withdrawals, I'd like to start with. This is an issue, which is a large issue for an industry that on average uses 5 million gallons per frac, and then each well being able to be fracked multiple times. And as you can imagine, the demand is increasing and will continue to be dramatically increasing for water for this industry. And the question really being, where will this water come from? What is the most appropriate source if industry will be moving forward as it is? And so just one quick case in point, there's a water management district in Ohio, the Muskingum Watershed Conservancy District, and they have been approached and had a few cases of water sales so far. Their district manages about 20% of the state, and they've come under a large amount of public scrutiny recently for these water sales. So our organization, along with other grassroots, actually gave testimony opposing water sales and asking them to slow down, take a pause, study what the ecological effects would be, and have appropriate public involvement in this process. And as a result, they have a temporary, essentially what is a moratorium on water sales until a USGS study is conducted. Second, we have the problem of wells being sited in ecologically sensitive areas. And this is a photograph taken in January, just in January of this year, one of the first high-volume horizontal fracking wells. This is in Tioga County, up very close to the lake, and happens to be located within a mile of the headwaters of the Grand River, which is a wild and scenic river, and also, again, located in the Lake Erie Basin. As a result of this development, very close to the Grand River, American Rivers National Organization actually has declared the Grand River an endangered river, and we at the OEC, with help of volunteers, Kathy, have held a press event to highlight the problem of fracking wells located within these environmentally sensitive areas and to call for stronger, stricter regulations. Thirdly, our state lands and one of our federal lands in Ohio are now open for horizontal drilling activity. I know if any folks in the room were aware of that. Ohioans in the room? Did we have Ohioans in the room? Okay, were folks aware? That was, okay. It's surprising, I think, to some Ohioans, and I took note of that in Erica's presentation as well. Quail Hollow State Park is in Hartville, Ohio, actually in Stark County, one of the first to be targeted. Was recently pulled into a drilling unit for horizontal drilling through Ohio's unitization laws. We also have something called mandatory pooling. These two are a little bit different, and we're going to need to be spending some time in our office kind of sorting out and figuring out how this is happening, but it's poised to happen. And then additionally, just this August, it was announced that up to 13 drilling sites could be leased out of our only national forest, the Wayne National Forest, and that the park supervisor there stated that the forest management plan sufficiently addresses environmental impacts that could occur from horizontal drilling. So essentially saying a new forest management plan does not need to be developed. The one that exists is adequate to incorporate what would be the environmental impacts from this industry. And so we've had some organizations taking action on that as well. Aside from concerns over water withdrawals and fracking in sensitive areas is the issue of what to do with fracking waste. Fracking produces millions of gallons of waste fluids contaminated with toxic chemicals, gases such as methane, heavy metals such as lead and mercury, and also radioactive materials, which are unleashed from the fracking process or released and then brought up. Currently in Ohio, it's important to note regulations allow for fracking fluids to be stored in temporary open pits. We are not aware of any to date, but there is an allowance in law for that, and we feel that would put humans and wildlife at great risk. There's also the issue of long-term disposal. Ohio law requires that oil and gas waste must be disposed of through underground injection wells, which Ohio DNR regulates. Ohio already has 177 of these. Yet due to the ramp-up of the industry in Ohio and the fact that we receive waste from Pennsylvania and the number of, and potentially, hopefully not, but potentially New York, we feel that this number is likely to increase substantially. And then there's also a concern that municipalities can give authority for brine, which we believe would, brine is the term used in the law, but we believe that would likely include the fracking flowback fluids, that could be spread on roads for ice and dust control, which is very concerning. And getting very close, John, just so you're not getting too nervous. I have 2 more slides. Finally, we have this issue of seismic activity as the result of disposal of fracking waste into these underground injection wells. And in Ohio, state officials actually closed one disposal well after a magnitude 4.0 earthquake hit Youngstown, Ohio on New Year's Eve. And this map shows, let's see, the dots are representative of the, I think the size, of the earthquake magnitude. And this was the 11th earthquake to strike the area in 2011, an area which wasn't previously considered to be seismically active. As a result of these quakes, at least, the Ohio DNR has issued a series of reforms to injection well regulations. I'm not going to get into the details, but one piece was that they couldn't, of the reforms, that they couldn't inject at the same depth that they were going into, I believe, what was basement rock. And in addition to all these concerns, we've actually seen, maybe our first incident, one incident in Ohio, according to the Youngstown Vindicator, on July 7th, 2012, a truck carrying brine wastewater from a fracking site in Trumbull County began leaking, leaving a 5-mile trail of rust-colored fluid. And the county engineer believed that the spill was over 1,000 gallons. Ohio EPA, I think, was quoted saying it was only 25 gallons. The Ohio EPA was notified, declined to test the liquid beyond a pH balance. This is what was reported, and no fines have been issued, but the incident has sparked protests around the county. I'm sorry, I have one more slide. I misstated before. These are just numbers from Ohio Department of Natural Resources, which they have given out in public presentations as to where we'll be in 2013, 2014. And just in summary, Ohio is very much at the beginning stages of development for this industry, but we have many reasons to be concerned looking at our sister state of Pennsylvania for our environment, for our health, and for the health of our communities. And I'd be happy to answer questions after this presentation today. Thank you.
What I'd like to do is this, Erica, why don't we all stand up here? I imagine that there are several things that are going on. One is that some of you probably have questions for our panelists, and I want to start with that. 2 is that I got the sense from the outset that several of you actually have additional information to share, whether it's from your state in Minnesota or folks in New York who have been very deeply concerned about this issue may want to raise some of those things. So I want to have some time for folks in the room to share their thoughts and information with us, in addition to questions for our panelists. Finally, what I'd like to do is, to the extent that when we go around the room, we don't have it covered, is to just fill in any gaps about our knowledge about the drilling boom throughout the Great Lakes region, and then finally just a quick update about some things that are happening federally on this issue. Let's see if we can all do that before we have to hop on the bus and get down to the waterfront if we can. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'd like to do first is, first of all, just to thank the panelists for their thorough presentations and excellent set of facts that they were to be able to present to us. Let's first just start. What factual questions do we have for our
And you've been watching a session on fracking and Great Lakes health. We are going to have more coverage of Great Lakes Week from Cleveland in just a moment. Stay with us.
Take some time for a two-lane adventure.